the idea of publicly calling out a preacher is not something that I want to do. I don't wake up in the morning thinking, who am I going to call out today? So normally, if I just have that thought, it's terrifying to me. Like,
Yeah.
no, I'm not going to do that. But then suddenly something happens and you have to. And there's courage. So I'm just talking to my friend Mike Brown and he's going through a difficult time. It wasn't a confrontation. And at that point, he was asking me and others to defend him if these become public accusations. List the things that I heard. And I just need you to tell me, are they true or are they false? He gave his version of everything. He did confess to probably 60 to 70%. There are things he left out that he I would imagine he left them out because we didn't know about them. With all of the problems with the report, it did come to the right conclusions, which was that Mike engaged in sexually abusive misconduct.
Wake up and win. Wake up and win. Wake up and win. Wake up and win. Wake up.
Guys, welcome back to another episode of the Wake Up and Win podcast. It's great to see you all this afternoon or whatever time it is where you are watching. We've got a special guest with us today. Ron Cantor is a big voice in the advocacy space. He is a strong advocate for many victims of Clergy SA. But frankly, a year and a half ago, he would have never imagined that this is where he would have been. So I'm going to let him introduce his ministry and what he's been doing over the last 25 to 30 years. But we're going to dive in with some great conversations today, a little bit about IHOP KC and a lot about Mike Brown, and then, of course, where we're going from here. So welcome to the show, Ron Cantor.
Thank you so much, Blaise. It's great to be here.
I think you said Shalanu TV is the name of your current ministry. Is that right?
Yes. Shalanu is a Hebrew word. It means hours. And that's a weird name for a television station, but I'll explain what it is. It is the only Hebrew language TV station really in the history of the world, because TV is relatively new. And Hebrew is, a rebirth language. For couple thousand years, people did not use Hebrew as a daily spoken language. It kind of disappeared, but it was in the Bible, so it stayed alive. It was a prayer language, and now Hebrew is a language of the nation of Israel. About 5 years, in fact, we're celebrating our 5-year anniversary in 1 week on what's called Yom Ha'atzmaut, which is Independence Day in Israel. We birthed a 24/7 Hebrew-speaking gospel channel in Israel. So We've been doing that for 5 years. We have a team in Israel on the ground. I'm traveling right now. We're doing what we can to bring the good news of Yeshua to the people of Israel, along with many other great ministries. In fact, one of the things I love about our TV station is it's not all our content. We will take content from believers all over the country and put it on free just to get the message out.
That's beautiful. I love it. So are you, is your background Jewish, or are you Messianic Jewish, or how did you get involved in this type of ministry?
I am Jewish. I was raised in Richmond, Virginia. And when I was 18 years old, my best friend became a believer, shared the message of Jesus with me. I thought he was nuts. I don't know why he would want to. We had a great life. I mean, we were doing all the horrible things that in 10 years we would have ended up in jail or divorced or, who knows, or dead. But at 18, it was still fun. And I didn't know why he would want to stop doing those things. And make a long story short, I was intrigued by the idea of eternal life. I never enjoyed the idea that I would just die and cease to exist. And I began to search, and that led me in a car on the way home from a movie about Jesus in 1983 between Durham and Lewisburg Junior College in North Carolina. I prayed and I said, God, I want to know the truth. Is Jesus really the Messiah? Is he the Son of God? Or do I need to be a Hindu or an Orthodox Jew? I don't know. And as I'm praying this prayer, my friend Dean loses control of the car. It begins to swerve from side to side. It flips over upside down into a ditch. And I'm thinking that's a weird way to answer my prayer. I was really offended. Like, man, I pray and I'm almost getting killed here. But we're in front of one house. There's only one house, and the people who answer the door are believers. Next thing you know, they're sharing the gospel with me. As they're sharing with me, the presence and power of God. It was like a force field of power just radiating from my body, and I didn't know what it was. I knew it wasn't anything I'd ever felt before, and it was real. It was tangible, and I just realized that God had put all these things together. And so I didn't do anything formal in that evening. I didn't walk down an aisle. I didn't pray a prayer. I just left there a changed person. I was different, and I was born again, and that was 40 years ago.
That's amazing, man. I love that. I'm just immediately feeling, just the goodness of God on that story. That's so powerful. You're literally standing in front of a house and talking to these believers in the presence of God. I mean, not to belabor this story, but I'm just thinking about, day-to-day believers that we're just living our lives, and God puts people in front of our path at times, and that's just a wild story. I wonder what it would be like to talk to them today. Have you?
I have tried. They gave me a book, Evidence That Demands a Verdict by Josh McDowell.
I read that book years
because
ago.
it had a lot of messianic prophecies, and me being Jewish, I wanted to study these. I never knew that there were Old Testament prophecies that talked about somebody that looked like exactly like Jesus in terms of his life and what happened to him. And so they gave me that book, and it had his phone number, their phone number in it. So years later, I found it. I disconnected, and I made a video where I put the map on it, and like they would have lived around here, and thus far I've never found them. But God bless them. They were ready.
That's so
were
cool.
Ready, and they were Baptists. So when I said to them, I asked them, I said, "What's happening to me? What is this power?" They really had no paradigm to
Dude,
understand.
This story is so great. Now, I have to just say, because I've been talking this week to, I've done some like kind of out of the box interviews I'm doing interviews with charismatics and cessationists, because as you know, in this exposure space of all this stuff, there's a lot of interesting bedfellows that are made, because everybody wants to, stop clergy sexual abuse, or at least we hope so, in the church. And so, depending on people's points of views on theology, it doesn't really bother me too much when I realize that they are focused on Jesus and trying to stop injustice. I'm really thankful for that. But I love this story of the Baptist preaching the gospel to you, and the power of God comes on you. And you're like, what is this? They're like, I don't know, but welcome to the King. Welcome to getting saved. So anyway, I love it, man. Okay, so talk to us. You've been in ministry for quite a while. You've been doing a lot of things for the Lord, teaching the word, preaching the gospel. And suddenly, a year and a half ago, International House of Prayer blows up in scandal. Mike Bickle, who is was a trusted teacher in, I would say, for the Messianic community. What's the connection there? How did you, to Mike Bickle, and how did you become a voice in that whole issue?
Well, the larger ministry that I've been a part of for many, many years, Tikkun, our president was very close friends with Mike Bickle, Asher and Trader. And when I say friends, it wasn't, you don't really know somebody if you don't work with them or live with them, vacation with them. So it wasn't that level. It was a ministry friendship. We have ministry friendships where we see people on a stage and maybe we get a bite to eat, but you don't really know them until you know them daily.
That makes sense.
So on that level, it was a friendship, but it was significant because IHOP was very generous to our ministry and other ministries in Israel. One of their primary prayer targets was praying for revival in Israel, issues surrounding the end times, and so there was a real affinity between our group Tikkun and IHOP, even though we're much, much smaller. So I personally had never met Mike until I was at a table with three people back in the early 90s where we had a meal together, but he would not have remembered that. And it was one of those meals where I just sat and listened.
Yeah.
But in about 7 or 8 years ago, I wrote an article on the fourth temple. Everybody talks about the third temple, but Ezekiel 47 talks about a fourth temple that will be built when the Messiah comes back. And so I wrote an article called, I'm more concerned with the fourth temple or something like that. And out of the blue, I get an email from Mike Bickle saying, Ron Cantor, you and I are the only people talking about the fourth temple. And I was like, I didn't even know he knew who I was. So I wrote back. I said, you read Mike Bickle? You read what I write? Like I was really blown away. And he said, I read everything you write. And I don't know if that's true or not, because now I know that a big part of the game was manipulation, and part of manipulation is flattery. But I liked it. I was blessed. He even made we had a little quote from him about our ministry, and he endorsed several of our books. So we became friendly. In 2019, I went to the 20th anniversary of IHOP as a representative of Tikkun. I was the CEO at the time. And he made time. He spent an hour with me. I mean, he was, everybody wanted him that weekend. And we just sat at the coffee shop there with a few other people and just had a great time. Mike was a fun person to be with, at least on that level. I never worked with him. So fast forward a few years, and I do remember as these things are coming out, or about to come out, maybe 3 months before, because I would tell you, if you ask me about Mike Bickle, I mean, he was my North Star in the charismatic movement.
Yeah.
I thought with all of this nonsense that we're seeing and these false prophecies, false COVID prophecies and false election prophecies, I said with all of and CSA, Mike, I could look at Mike Bickle and know this is a man of prayer, a man of the word. So I was such a fanboy that a friend, I won't say what her name is, but she basically said, I don't want to burst your bubble, but it's not what you think it is. So I didn't receive that. I would not receive that.
What year was that she said that?
That was a few months before exposure.
Okay, so she's like, hey, I don't want to ruin everything for you, but what you see is not what you're really getting. And you went,
and
no,
I said,
there's no way. Yeah.
I can't hear you. But I also knew that when you work with, I know I'm almost 60 years old, so I do understand the difference.
You look good for 60, bro.
Thank you. Well, I'm not yet. I got 2 weeks. But I understand the difference between seeing somebody in their best. Like when I'm preaching and ministering, people are seeing me do the thing that I do better than anything else in the world. They're not seeing whether or not my house is clean, how I treat my wife, if I'm looking at other women, what I read, what I watch. They're not seeing any of that. And they're not seeing how I treat my employees. They're not seeing how I respond to authority. They're just seeing me operate in the thing that God has gifted me to do, which was free, by the way. I did not develop this gift. It was given to me by God. So there's no pride there, but what we really need to look at is character. So I understood what she was saying. I didn't want to hear it. And then on October, I think it was the day before all this come out. I think it may have been October 27th.
Hey guys, this episode is brought to you by Wake Up and Win Insurance. We help clients all over the nation with their term life, whole life, or universal life insurance, and we're definitely happy to help you with a consultation.
Check the description below for more info.
So in Israel at that time, we were 20 days out from October 7th. So I remember walking around our neighborhood, knowing that rockets could be coming any minute. I mean, that's how it was back then. If you wanted to get some exercise, if I would ride my bike, I would ride my bike along a line, and that's how I exercise on my bike. And I was willing to risk my life to get exercise, but I would do it not on the beach road, which I loved, but on the main road, because I knew I had 30 seconds if there was a siren, and I could be safe. So I remember walking around the block, knowing that I might have to run at any minute, when a friend of mine, Elizabeth Herder, who was part of the Advocate group, which became known as the Advocate group, called me up and she said, listen, I just want you to know tomorrow it's going to be public that Mike Bickle has been involved in several cases of CSA, which if she had said CSA, which she didn't say, I wouldn't have even known what she was talking about. Like what is CSA? I have,
and for the audience,
so
clergy's sexual abuse is what we're saying, right?
Right. Clergy sexual abuse, which is the idea, and it's different than adultery. I had people teach me this, and it was humbling for me. And I remember who it was who corrected me on Twitter and said, adultery is something that happens between two consenting adults. Clergy sexual abuse is when a preacher uses his position of power, his celebrity, to groom somebody into a sexual relationship. And so we didn't have those terms. They were out there. We just didn't know them. So Elizabeth calls me up and she alerts me it's going to happen the next day. And I knew immediately it was true. I don't know how I knew that. I don't think it was prophetic. It's more based on in my 40 years of being in ministry or so, every single time there has been an accusation of sexual abuse inside the church, it has been true. Now, that's just my own experience. It's not science. Scientifically, they say that between 92 and 98% of allegations turn out to be true. So when somebody finds that courage to come forward, there is a high probability that it's true. When it's two people in the same community around the same time period, that 92 to 98 goes to over 99%. It's just very rare that two people are making up stories. And in this case, there was one clear allegation from Deborah Perkins, but there was high speculation that there were several others. So that was the beginning. And I didn't have much to say publicly about it. We were involved in the past that I don't know why, because in most of my living moments, the idea of publicly calling out a preacher is not something that I want to do. I don't wake up in the morning thinking, who am I going to call out today? So normally, if I just have that thought, it's terrifying to me. Like, no, I'm not going to do that. But then suddenly something happens and you have to. And there's courage and there's grace. I just have to believe that it's a grace from God. But in 2019, there was a guy named Stephen Powell who had a bunch of allegations against Todd Bentley. This would be, I think, the third or fourth time that he was publicly exposed as being a sexual predator to some degree. And he tried to get those to Rick Joyner, and Rick would not meet with him. Rick was, for all intents and purposes, he was the guy that restored Todd twice now. So he was the address. And Rick was trying to say, I'm not the address, even though he was on Todd's board and he was the guy that restored him. So he wouldn't meet with the guy. So they became public. The allegations became public. And then the next day, Rick made a video where he pretty much cursed the people bringing the allegations forward. And Rick would write later that some of these people bringing forth the allegations are doing worse things than Todd. So worse things than manipulating women online to take their tops off. But because you're a big shot celebrity preacher, passing around pictures of your wife, things like that. Horrible things, and worse.
Yeah.
So, but it seems that Rick's, and again, I can only go by his words, but it seems that Rick Joyner's theology, and I would say that Mike Bickle, to my shock, has the same theology, and that is that the calling on certain people is so great that you have to overlook the character faults, that you have to take into account that Satan is working overtime to make this person fall. But their ability to reach so many thousands and millions, maybe, that we have to, but no, we don't. That is nowhere in the Bible. The Bible gives clear standards for leadership, and people are to be held account. 1 Timothy 5:20 says elders that keep sinning should be publicly rebuked. And by the way, in 2013, a lot of folks don't know it, Todd was again exposed, but it was private, and they did not publicly rebuke him. And because they did not publicly rebuke him and sit him down permanently, which should have happened, more people were abused. So I'm saying all this, that when I saw Rick attack the people that were bringing the accusations, even suggest that they might be going to hell because Jude calls them fault finders, and fault finders, it's just crazy connecting dots theology.
Yeah.
I felt like I had to say something, and I wrote an open letter to him.
This was 2013 that you wrote this open letter? 2019. Okay, I got you.
Yeah, and ironically, the first person to reach out to me and thank me was Patricia King. She had gotten my information from a friend, and I didn't know what she was going to say. I thought I knew she wanted to contact me. I thought this was the end of my ministry, that they were going to all come after me. But she wrote me and just said wonderful things, and we became friends. That's why I'm kind of shocked at the take that, I've reached out to her. She's not responded, but we're friendly.
Yeah.
So I'm a little surprised that she had a very strong conviction in 2019 regarding what Rick Joyner and Todd Bentley were doing, but let's not go there right now. So how did I get into this? So then everything comes out about IHOP, and I'm just watching from the sidelines because I live in Israel, and I trusted the people. I knew some of the people that were in the Advocate group, and I had hoped that they would do something. So later on in December, I decided I would make a video. When I say decided, I really felt like the Lord put it on my heart, not to really talk about Mike Bickle, but what we can learn from Mike Bickle. What is the message here to leaders, to men, about controlling our own bodies? When I hear men, lecturing women on how they dress, and listen, as a male, it's a lot easier to live life if women dress modestly. But I'm not a dog. I'm not in heat. I'm not what physically males can't be. But I have self-control. Every minister is in control of his own body.
Yes.
The idea that somebody dressing inappropriately made you do something, tempted you at the level that there is no temptation that has come that we can't resist. So that was kind of in this video, which was widely received. And then about a month later, I wrote something on Twitter about 10 things that we can do to protect our people in churches. And one of the things I suggested is that we need in every church somebody who's not an elder, preferably a female, which is the address that somebody would go to, an advocate that could say, somebody could say, listen, I was abused. I was sexually assaulted. It was the pastor, it was an elder. And that person is empowered to launch an investigation. Because what often happens is I call this the weaponization. If I could say it, it would be better, but the weaponization of Matthew 18. And that's where the pastor says, anything you've done, even though I may be guilty, because you went directly to elders, or you went outside, or you went to the internet, I'm calling you on a technical foul, and so it doesn't count.
That is such a
and that is
great way to put it, Ron. Yeah.
Yeah, you're weaponizing the scripture. And so Mike Bickle would do that. Like, if I'm waiting for all these women to come and do Matthew 18 with me. Well, there's a reason why a victim would not want to do Matthew 18 with somebody who assaulted them sexually. I think we can all understand that. And by the way, 1 Timothy 5:19, it talks about the elders receiving accusations. So Matthew 18 is probably dealing with personal offenses. But when you're talking about crimes, and that's another thing we can go into, is the church is not the state, and the state is not the church. God has empowered Caesar, the state, to deal with crimes. So if somebody is a pedophile in a church, pastor, you don't have the option of dealing with it in-house. So these are things that we brought up, and I'll tell you who reached out to me. Of all people, I get a text message from General Kurt Fuller, who I'd never met and didn't know, but I knew who he was because he was the new chairman of the board at IHOP.
Okay.
And we had a great conversation. And he wrote me because he liked what I was saying, or
I need to contextualize this for some of the listeners, because you are spitting facts right now, and this is so good. So let's go to you get a text message from Kurt Fuller in what month and what year?
February 24.
Okay.
So
Kurt had just become the new head of IHOP, and he's trying to work with the Advocate group, although we know that fell out pretty bad. But he reaches out to you, which for the audience that didn't follow this whole story, when Mike was, had to step down, and then you had the leadership of IHOP put in Kurt Fuller, who was kind of a random person to put in charge of the ministry, but they thought, well, this guy will exert strength and, help lead us into the future. So he starts trying to hear the stories and make sense of it all, but then he ends up heavily leaning against the Advocate group. So tell me what that conversation was like with him at that point in February 2024.
Well, Halfway through, I brought up the fact that I know many of these people in the advocate group, and I could, seeing that he trusts me enough that he wanted to have a conversation, and I knew other leaders who were in touch with him. I said, listen, I know these people. They're not bad people. They're not liars. They're people who care about IHOP, and they care about these victims. So I tried to convince him of that, and I said, listen, if there's something I can do to bring you guys together to build some trust. And I left that phone call almost like in shock that he was open. The next day I talked to 4 members of the advocate group. They were open. And then the next day he without consulting me, knowing that I was trying to bring both sides together, he makes the infamous enough video where he that kind of ruined any chance of bringing the sides together, where he called them liars because he misunderstood what a documentary is. What we're doing right now is not a documentary. This is an interview.
Yeah.
And so over some interviews that they did, it's a long story, but he publicly called them liars, and that was that.
Yeah.
So I continue. So it was during February that I began to sense the Lord speaking to me that we were going to be involved, as I'm in a doctoral program that ends in July. And I just felt the Lord say, as you come to the end of your studies, I'm going to start using you more and more in this space of advocacy. And I said, okay, how are you going to do that? How will that ever happen? I mean, I can make YouTube videos or whatever, and I'm not really trained. I'm not qualified. At that point, I was starting to read books. Somebody would give me Diane Langberg's book, Redeeming Power. I just finished her most recent book, When the Church Harms God's People, which everyone should read. So I'm trying to educate myself, and I'm listening to people who are, helping me to understand. But still, there was no avenue for this, and I wasn't going to make it happen because I have a life. I have a ministry in Israel, and so come to June, I get a phone call. I was in Scotland. We had done some a week of ministry at on Israel at a retreat center in. By the way, Scotland is, if you've never been to Scotland, what a beautiful place. I'm in Scotland. I get a call from John O'Hall, who is one of the members of the advocate group, and he said, "Listen, would you guys in Tikkun be open to sponsoring an investigation into this whole IHOP thing? Because we're not making any headway with the leadership of IHOP. If we do it on our own, no one's going to trust us because they're going to say, well, we were already out to get Mike Bickle." And they said, you guys are, you have had a friendly relationship with Bickle and with IHOP, and you're friendly with us. So, people will trust the investigation. We brought it to our board. Everyone was against it just because, we could, foresee how difficult it would be, and no one has time.
Yep.
But then by the end of that conversation, there was a prophetic sense. No one else is going to do it. There's no charismatic ministry in America that has the money, the funds, the resources that is willing to do it. Most of your charismatic preachers had nothing to say about the Bickle situation for months. Mm-hmm. And then when they did say it, it was, one preacher in California, I love Mike Bickle, which is great, but there's victims involved here. So,
right.
And real sin occurred, or, Rick Joyner saying, Mike's going through a hard time, but he's going to be back soon, or calling it a nothing burger.
Yeah.
So, but very few people, were willing to confront it. So we had this kind of sense that God was calling us to do it. We began to meet with the IHOP leadership team because we wanted them to endorse it. We figured if the advocate group endorsed it and IHOP endorsed it, then it would be trusted by everyone. They would not endorse it. They let us meet with them for many months, and I should probably 6 weeks. And we finally said to them, listen, either give us an answer, or we're just going to, your non-answer will be our answer, and we're going to move forward. That's what ended up happening. We moved forward with the investigation. And so suddenly I find myself as part of a group, the primary communicator, overseeing an investigation into Mike Bickle's sexual sin. And that's when I really started to learn, because nobody trusted us. Survivors did not trust us. Advocates did, because we've received money from IHOP. The belief was because for some weird reason, when they incorporated their new church, they listed Tikkun as a beneficiary if it falls apart.
Sure.
So people were there were rumors that we didn't even know about it, and when we found out, we
You're
demanded
like,
to be
shoot,
removed.
this doesn't look good.
Right.
Because it's about to fall
So-
apart.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I began to reach out to advocates and to survivors, and that's really when I began to learn a lot, and gain their trust. And I think they would say today, I'm thinking about specific people. I won't mention their names, but leaders of survivor groups. I did Zoom calls and text messages, and then one advocate who's outside of the whole IHOP world reached out to me. I had an 1.5-hour phone call with her, and I really I just realized that as your typical older male white preacher, I just I checked every thing for somebody that you shouldn't trust and listen
Yeah.
to. But I heard their hurt and their pain, and it was and the devastating results of abuse, not just sexual abuse, but spiritual abuse.
Yeah.
How it sends people to psychologists and therapists, and can take years to get over. So I learned a lot. And then
Can I ask you a question
October,
in the middle of this timeline, because this is really good? Why do you think it is that so many men, like in our culture, in the not just the charismatic culture, but just the conservative culture, which would be the majority of the Christian culture, so many men have such a hard time with this space, the advocacy space, or hearing the stories or believing the stories. It's like they kind of click into this mode of like, oh, well, they're trying to tear down the whole world, or they're trying to, they just want to do a hashtag believe all women, but they just want to destroy a ministry, or like talk about the importance of male. Because when I came into the space, barely got in, I just realized, oh my gosh, these women need a voice. And there's a lot of men that start shouting and start saying their opinion, positive or negative, but oftentimes we don't actually listen to the story. Can you talk about the importance of being a male in the space and how that can bring strength, but also the importance of listening and just that? Speak to that if you would.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say it this way. It's not that they're looking for a man to stand up for them because we're stronger and we're men. It's because no men stand up for them. And so when a leader, in the charismatic movement, whether it's Alan Hood or you or whoever stands up for them, and it means something. And most of us, we can't comprehend what it is like to be sexually assaulted. We cannot comprehend for the average male has not been groomed into a sexual relationship, whether by a male or a female. We just don't know, because this predominantly happens with men preying on women. Sometimes it's men preying on younger boys or young men, but we don't know. I don't know what the pain and the damage that it does to one's soul to be manipulated at that level. And you don't know that you're a victim until it's over. So I can say this, we'll talk about the Mike Brown situation in a minute, but when I came face to face, and that it was by phone, with his primary victim, I didn't know it at the time. She told me later, when you reached out to me, on the one hand, I was terrified. She told me she was terrified. Is he going to even believe my story? But when it was over, she said she couldn't believe that a male leader in the charismatic world cared about what she had to say and believed what she had to say. And that gave her strength. So, and I'm saying this to other men out there who are ministers and preachers, this is right for you to do. And the fact that there's only a few willing to do it it's tragic. And one of the reasons that folks don't do it is to save the institution. Like right now, if you look at IHOP, a institution that promoted 24/7 prayer for 25 years, someone could make a case, don't expose Mike Bickle because you're going to hurt this ministry that is doing so much good. And that is not a healthy philosophy to have. We have to have enough faith to believe that if we do what the Bible says, which is to confront leaders in sin, investigate it, and then expose it. If we do what the Bible tells us to do, God can take care of everything else. God is God. Mm-hmm. He created the world in 6 days with the power of his voice. So he is capable of taking care of the reputation of a ministry. And I have been threatened. Don't expose me because you're going to ruin all this great ministry. I have to have enough faith that God sees all that. Mm-hmm. God is the one who's doing these exposures. I mean, it's not by accident that they're happening all at the same time. Mm-hmm. So God is behind it, and God is telling us, don't think that protecting the institution is a godly thing to do. And I would encourage people to read Diane Langberg's book, When the Church Harms God's People, because she talks about in the Southern Baptist Convention, where you had a whole group of men at the top who were working hard, according to the book, who were working hard to keep allegations sealed, quiet, to protect the badge at all cost.
Mm-hmm. And look how it worked out for them. Here we are in 2025, and the SBC might as well be a hashtag for corruption. I mean, because they tried to bury it all.
Right, it doesn't work out.
No, it never does.
And in the situation we're going to talk about now, this person covered up his own sin for 23 years, probably justifying that if I tell on myself, all this good work that God has called me to do will never get done because no one is as good as me at doing it.
Yeah, it's so right on point, Ron, and just the way that you said it, and I can't help but think of Jesus leaving the 99 and going to the one, or telling the story of him leaving the 99, going to the one, and I just get this picture in my mind of like, well, what about the 99? What if we ruin the 99 when you go get the one? And I just think that what you said is so important for the body of Christ to recognize, like, hey, we have to be willing, because all the good work that we think we've got done, all the incredible fruit that we have, all these things that we would say, but if there is a trail of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or more of sexually assaulted victims, and regardless of people's journey on the process, because even what you said about becoming educated and realizing the difference of clergy sexual abuse, and there's so many people that just go, no, that's an affair. Oh, these young women are this, and they just are bring these intense kind of viewpoints toward these young women. But even if you're there, you've got to realize that the pastors that do this to young women, usually the pastors end up continuing to enrich themselves with their ministries, and the women end up losing their faith, and because they're kicked aside. So regardless of how you want to try to say, well, I'm not going to read pop psychology or this, that, or the other, I really think everybody needs to educate just a little bit. And even if you're not going to, you need to realize that there are souls at stake on the back end of this thing, and usually the pastors get protected and they get enriched, and they're fine just to roll off into the sunset, while these women, I mean, we look at Sarah Monk, which we'll get into this, but Christina and I talked to her, and I know you've spent much time with her, and I'm just thinking about just her story and the reality that there was a time when she was losing her faith, because it's like the church, when you tell somebody, yes, you're on stage saying our culture is sexually pure and we're going to do this, that, and the other, and revival fire like Mike Brown did, and then you treat her in this way and you cross these boundaries, and then you have this, phone affair, this sexual affair over the phone that he had, that he was caught in, and now Sarah's looking at that going, wait a second, I was just violated, I was just treated this way, and there's no responsibility for it, no accountability for it, and I don't even know if I can believe what he said. So even if the doctrines were true and the teaching was right and all this stuff, the actions, that's why Timothy says, Paul says, watch your life and your doctrine, so that those who hear you might be saved, and you yourself might be saved. You look at a Sarah Monk listening to the doctrine, or listening to the teaching, or listening to even scriptures promoted by Fire School of Ministry and Brown, and then she sees the lifestyle and goes, wait a second, now she's off losing her faith. And it wasn't until advocates came and said, we hear you, we listen to you, we believe you, like Chris Bennett, we believe you. It restored her faith in Jesus Christ, because the church is the body of Christ, and the hands of Christ, and the ears of Christ, and the heart of Christ. So let's get into this Michael Brown situation. If you'll tell us just a snippet of your background with Michael Brown, so that people can understand you're not just a man named Ron Cantor, as Jeremiah Johnson would say, but you have a long history, much longer than Jeremiah Johnson does, with Michael Brown. And you don't have to get into all the ins and outs, but just give us the background so people understand how you matter in this story.
Sure. I want to read a verse real quick, because you were talking about, even the 99, he'll leave to go after the one. Dr. Bob Gladstone, who is a good friend in our history, goes back to the Brownsville revival, wrote a great piece yesterday, which is on my Facebook page. It's on his as well. But I was so impressed, I copied it. I shared it. I didn't steal it.
Sure.
But he this verse from 1 Corinthians, on the contrary, the members of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable. And those members of the body that we think are less honorable, we clothe with greater honor. And our less respectable members are treated with greater respect. Whereas our more respectable members do not need this. But God has so arranged the body, giving the greater honor to the inferior member, that there may be no dissension within the body, but the members may have the same care for one another. And we have this exactly opposite, where we give honor to those who don't need it, to those who are already famous, who already have books, and those are the ones who demand honor. We call it the royal pastor model, where you have a pastor of a large congregation, and he's treated like royalty. And so God is saying here that we need to learn, and this went really against, Greco-Roman culture, of honoring those under you as opposed to those above you. So I got to know Michael Brown in 1985, 40 years ago, when I was going through, I was a new Jewish believer, and my parents asked me if I would meet with a rabbi in New York City. Long story short, I went to New York City, and a mutual friend put me in touch with Mike, and he just kind of coached me. Mike is brilliant as a apologist, probably the premier Messianic Jewish apologist in the world, debates rabbis, memorized, I think it was like dozens of scriptures a day for 6 months as a new believer, photographic memory, and has a real anointing to minister these truths. So it was a real honor for me to be, I didn't know at the time, he was, let's think, I was probably 20, so he was 30. But I was blessed to get to know him. I ended up going to Bible school, where he was the dean of Old Testament studies. And then I followed him to Maryland, where he planted another Bible school. And I attempted to finish my degree there. I never did. That would come many years later. And we just started life. I did my life there. We were friends. He was probably the primary mentor in my life. I've always had a lot of mentors. So he was one of many, but he was the primary one for many years. Until he left the congregation about 6 years later. And about 2 years after that, we hear about the Brownsville revival. And we had a great passion for revival. We wanted to see a move of God, like we read about in Wesley and Whitfield and Finney. So he goes down to check out the Brownsville revival, and he calls me up from there, and he's shaking. I could hear it in his voice. He's undone. And he said, this is it. This is the thing that we've been praying for. So my wife and I, we make plans to go visit, and it was glorious. It was just amazing. The presence of God was just beautiful. And millions of people came, 2 million visitors over 5 years. Hundreds of thousands of people going forward during the altar calls. It was a legit American revival. In the midst of that, he asked by the leadership of the revival, Pastor John Kilpatrick, to start a Bible school, which becomes BRSM, Brownsville Revival School of Ministry. And he invited me early on to be a teacher there. And I really, really wanted to go. But we were on our way to Ukraine as missionaries. We were going to be part of a new Bible school that was training people for Jewish ministry, because there was a revival in Ukraine at the same time. But I really didn't want to go to Ukraine. I wanted to go. I just, for about a week, I wouldn't even pray about it, because I knew what God was saying, and I didn't want to hear it. So I ended up going to Ukraine. And it was a great experience. And then we moved to Budapest. And then in our time in Budapest, I thought the door to Brownsville was forever closed. The Lord had said no, and that was it. But in Budapest, I began to have this sense that we were supposed to go and begin to teach there. And there's a whole story to that I won't bore you with, having to do with dreams and confirmations and why God said to wait 2 years. It had to do with things in my own heart that God was dealing with. But I got a hold of Mike and I said, is the door still open? He said, absolutely, come and you can teach Jewish roots. And, so we make plans, we move there, and it was like a dream come true, to join this faculty. And the faculty at the revival, and students can attest to, the faculty can attest to that, we were put on a pedestal. We were treated in a way that was unhealthy. I immediately was uncomfortable. Like I don't know what it's like to be a beautiful woman walking across a campus and having men stare at you, but that is how I felt as a minister. That I was a failed missionary a week ago in Budapest, and now I'm at the Brownsville Revival, and these people don't know that I'm a failure, and they're treating me like I'm somebody special. And it was bizarrely uncomfortable. And also, I got to be honest, it also fed my pride and my ego.
Sure.
So on the one hand, I recognized it and I didn't like it, and yet I loved it.
Sure.
But different leaders, particularly Mike, he could get up and just give an announcement and the kids would give him a standing ovation. And I imagine many of those students who I'm now back in touch with, because of the present situation, are, embarrassed that they, I look at that as grooming. I think it was, I'm not making a massive accusation. I think it was natural. Everyone loves to be loved. There's revival. These kids came to the school because of the passion of Mike Brown, but mostly because of the revival. And, but this was encouraged, primarily by Mike, this, what I called faculty worship. And, about a year after that, I was the most junior member in terms of time there. So I was not in the inner circle of teachers, but Mike often referred to me as his son in the faith, which, that really wasn't a relationship anymore. We were close. We were still friends, but we had drifted away from that, primary mentor role, that he no longer played that role. But what was I going to do? Go and tell him to stop calling me that? Yeah. He brought me here.
That is interesting, just to highlight. So, I mean, you were at one time very, very close in like a mentor-mentee relationship, and then when you're living there years later, you had definitely drifted apart. But now that you're there, you're kind of looked at as another kind of mini hero among many other staff, and now he's owning you again as his protege in a sense, is what it sounds like.
Yeah, and again, it would have been disrespectful for me to,
of course,
request him not to do that. And then a year later, so I've been there for a year, and then suddenly we find out that he's about to be fired. And I don't want to take time to go into how that happened, but he ends up getting fired. And I urged him to go to another city, and that let us finish out the semester, and then we can all meet you there, the faculty, and let's start a new school together. And he said, no, I have to do it. He was at the time writing and speaking a lot about the theme of revolution, which I never gravitated towards. I always felt it was a strange message. That it, comparing it to the 1960s, and Jeff, he was obsessed during this time with Che Guevara, and he was every day talking about different revolutionaries, and wrote a book called Revolution. And it just always seemed a little bit strange to me, but not strange enough that I would, leave. But then suddenly he's under fire and he's going to be fired. And I asked him, I said, Mike, please don't do this. I said, in tears, I asked him, I said, this is going to cause so much damage to personal lives. You are going to divide relationships. And we're taught, this is what we teach our students, that if you are not in control and you are let go of a position, then you go away quietly. You humble yourself. Now, he was the president, but he was under a board, and the board was going to fire him. Now,
and when you said don't do this, when you're saying don't do this, you're saying don't go across town and start the other school, is in essence what you're saying.
Don't go a mile and a half away and start a competing school, which is what he did.
Yeah.
I said, don't do this. It's not the right move. And I felt it would hurt him in the long run. And he looked at me, and I told him, listen, I love you, I care for you, but I can't be a part of a split. Never. Mm-hmm. I said, I'm going to stay with the school here. And he looked at me and he said, if you stay with the school, it will mean your destruction.
Oh my gosh.
So those were pretty hard words. Now he did come back to me about 2 years later, year and a half later, and apologized for he didn't specifically, I don't know if he specifically remembered that comment, but he apologized for.
Can I just hone in on something here? I want to target this statement only because I get that he came back and apologized, but it shows the, and this is a very common thing sadly in the charismatic movement in regards to splits or leaving the church or this, that, or the other. It's this kind of almost like a curse spoken over people that
Absolutely.
Look, we're the anointed. They have not moved on with God. They're not moving with the cloud. They're staying behind. We're splitting. I'm the new anointed man. And if you come with me, you'll also be anointed and blessed. But if you stay behind, this will be your destruction. And that's I don't know where that comes from, but it's almost like a prophetic kind of idea that, I mean, can you speak to that? Where does this come from?
Well, I mean, part of it came out of fear in his mind. He didn't want me to stay. And years later, he would write me an email as we were trying to repair our relationship and suggest that I was the cause of the split. And his understanding or his connecting the dots was because I stayed and people knew me as his son in the faith, that many people didn't go with him. That put a doubt in their mind. And had I gone with them, it would have been a clean sweep. All the faculty would have left and all the students would have left. Now, that is not true. Many people, there may have been some who did stay because of what he said, but many stayed because they didn't believe in splits, because their pastors told them to stay, because they were part of the Assemblies of God and they wanted to stay under the Assemblies of God. There were many reasons that people stayed.
But in his mind, this is the relationship that you bore in his mind, that it was important enough, as you are his, quote, spiritual son, which you said that made you uncomfortable, understandably so, that when you didn't go with him in the split, that is the reason why it caused so much doubt for people. And so that makes sense why he looks at you in this certain way, because
that was his contention. That wasn't reality.
Of course not.
I didn't have that much influence.
Yeah.
Like I said, I was the most junior member of the faculty. But that language is spiritually abusive language. It's manipulation to try and get someone to do what they don't want to do. And you're not just speaking honestly to them, you're using false prophetic words. So I laughed when he said that. I didn't break out into laughter, but I chuckled and I said, Mike, that's crazy that God is, I'm following my conscience here. God is going to destroy. I might be wrong. I might come back to you 10 years from now and say I made a big mistake, but God is not going to destroy me over this. And seeing that I'm here 40 years later, I'm sorry, let's get our chronology clear. 25 years later, I was not destroyed. And again, he took those words back. But in the moment, it did, whether even though I did not receive them, it would be.
It messes with you.
Affect me It messes with me because I finished one semester and then I realized because of my relationship with him, I needed to get out of there. Like me being, in continuing in the school with them right around the corner. I did what I had to do.
Yeah.
And it was time to move on. And I knew I was called to Israel. It was time to get ready to go. So we moved, and I suddenly found myself with no job. I was no longer part of the faculty. I had no speaking engagements coming. I had no money. So I had to go out and find a job. I mean, I found one with my dear sweet dad, who I'm going to go have lunch with in a few minutes. But
nice.
But I was out of ministry, and in my mind, ministry was still probably very much an idol to me. And so that, to be out of ministry was to fail in my mind. And in the back of my mind, this will mean your destruction. Look at you now.
Wow.
You're 8 months out.
Wow.
And you're done. God is finished with you. You're working a secular job. So, reckless words pierce like a sword. And, I went through a few of those incidents with him. I did not know. I always thought I was isolated. That was dumb of me. I should have assumed that if he was doing that, he was doing that to other people. And now I know because they've come and shared their testimonies. So that is our background. We did reconcile in 2008. And from 2008 until October of 2024, we had a very fruitful and loving friendship. And then in October, everything changed.
Okay, so I know you only have a certain amount of time at this point, so this gives us a really good context and background for your journey through the IHOP KC debacle, advocacy, learning that whole world. Now your Mike Brown background, and so seeing Mike Bickle kind of topple, then seeing the allegations against Mike Brown. I want to contextualize this for everyone as well. Firefly put out their report. It's been confirmed through Jim Holler and Firefly that what they called clergy sexual misconduct, which Mike Brown doesn't seem to own that statement, which is understandable why he doesn't. He doesn't seem to own a lot regarding that. But Sarah Monk, 19 and 20 years old, was led to believe that she's a spiritual daughter, was manipulated and groomed into kisses on the forehead, sitting on the lap, shoulder back rubs, going to the store with him at midnight for daddy-daughter talks, all this stuff. And then eventually what she says was slaps on the behind, which Mike Brown is calling flicks on the lower back. I do not understand this, but that's just to continue kind of going here. And then look, there's a few other things that are in all this, but where at this point, as I don't even want to go back to when you first heard and how you felt, but the report's out. What is your feeling on the report at this point, and what happens with Mike Brown now? Let's talk about it.
So the report itself was lacking in many ways. There were testimonies that should have been in there that were left out. There were leads that were not followed up and would have led to more evidence. With all of the problems with the report, it did come to the right conclusions, which was that Mike engaged in sexually abusive misconduct with Sarah Monk, and I can't remember how he related the one with Kim, an improper sexual relationship. Well, he said improper. I don't think he used the word sexual, but by context, it was clearly sexual because, through his own admission, there were
sexual
emails,
conversations,
text messages, and phone calls that were erotic in nature. So, why doesn't Mike own it? I think he doesn't own it because he hasn't owned it for 23 years. What we found out. So I found out in October because somebody emailed me and wanted me to be aware. I didn't know any of this, but apparently this has been a secret within the fire community that there were whispers about it, but nobody ever knew exactly what happened with Sarah Monk. So I've counted at least 10 confrontations, mine being the last. And I do want to say this so your listeners will know it, because we did get some backlash for going public, but I didn't hear about these allegations and then air them. I went directly to Mike. First, I was stunned. I could not focus for 3 days. I was just so
in 2024.
I just couldn't. This is 6 months ago. Yeah. And I couldn't fathom that they were true. And yet I know from my experience that they're normally true. So I send an email to Mike and I ask him about it. He emails me and says he heard some rumblings, but there's no truth, and which was a lie, obviously. And then
but just real quick. So there had been 10 other confrontations over 20 some odd years about this issue prior to you going to him in 2024, while Michael Brown is standing on a stage at IHOP KC and setting himself up as the intermediary for the conflict resolution. You're emailing him and saying, "Hey, Mike, I've heard that there's this thing with Sarah Monk and you from years ago." And he says, "Oh, yeah, I've heard whisperings, but none of it's true." But he's admitted other things privately in some of these 10 confrontations. But to you right there, he's saying none of it's true.
Yes,
this is a bold-faced lie to his spiritual son. His quote, spiritual son. Okay, keep going.
So the next day, so he asked me to call him, and he would explain everything. So I said, "Listen, I'm getting on a plane. I'm coming to America. I'll call you when I get to the States." I call him, and he did tell me that there was a girl that he acted foolishly around. She was a spiritual daughter, and that he foolishly, innocently crossed the line. So again, and we actually had a really good talk. We actually talked about some of the things that happened back at Brownsville in terms of the faculty worship, and it was actually a sweet conversation. I was not confronting him. I was just seeking to understand what is this all about. So between that phone call and the next, he talked to Rebecca Hopkins from the Roy's Report. And they were the ones investigating him. Most people know that, which is why I heard about it. Mm-hmm. So he disclosed to his board on October 25th what was happening. He had known since September 13th. And by the way, you mentioned the whole IHOP thing. If it wasn't for the IHOP thing and being prominently involved in the Todd Bentley thing in 2019, those two issues are the Todd Bentley thing caused Chris Bennett, a former student who had seen them holding hands. This caused Chris Bennett to finally do something about it and get in touch with Sarah. And then in 2023, when he went to IHOP and presented himself kind of as the adult in the room, as an elder and father to the body of Christ, at least in the charismatic world in America, there were people, more than one, that were like, "No, wait a minute. You have unresolved issues that you haven't dealt with." Like if he had just not done those things. If he
had just stayed under the carpet and said, "I'll just do my thing, stay in my lane." But he somehow, with this all in the background, gets up and says, "I'm going to help resolve these issues of clergy sexual misconduct."
Yes. And so what happened is a dear, sweet sister. I knew her when she was a teenager. Amber Collins, now Amber Rhodes. Her dad was part of the faculty, Keith Collins, who's also a dear friend. She's an advocate. And when you're an advocate, you just can't help yourself. You have to find out what happened. It pains you that people are suffering. So she gets a hold, and this would be late 2023, I guess, of Sarah. They haven't talked in 20 years, I don't think, or 18 years, 20 years. And she says, "Can you tell me what happened?" Now, this is 3 years after Chris Bennett, who was he was in the car where they held hands, and he was so bothered by it that he couldn't get out of his mind for 18 years. And he finally, when he sees Mike involved in the Todd Bentley thing, he gets a hold of Sarah and he says, "This is as a father. Now I'm a father. I'm married. That wasn't right. Help me understand." And Sarah, for the first time, because she had been covering for Mike all this time, she, in text messages that anyone can read, she opens up and she said, "I can't believe I'm telling you this, but this is the first time." So, and I had never seen I didn't know who she was. I had never seen so I'm just talking to my friend Mike Brown and he's going through a difficult time. And he tells his board on the 25th. On the 26th, I write him. And this time I'm a bit more, these were very loving communications. There was no animosity or anger and it wasn't a confrontation. And at that point, he was asking me and others to defend him if these become public accusations. So I wrote him, and I CC'd two leaders that he respects, elder level leaders, and I said, Mike, we can't really defend you if we don't know what happened. So I'm gonna, we've had sweet conversation up until now, but now I'm gonna actually list the things that I heard, and I just need you to tell me, are they true or are they false? So I list all the things with Sarah that I heard, whether it was kissing on the lips or holding hands or, going into Walmart late at night. And then, the situation with Kim, which was very vague. We didn't know what it was. So he wrote back, and what his response is in the Firefly report.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is that his responses were in red to my questions that were in black. And in the Firefly report, they're just all black. So you can't really decipher. Mm-hmm. But he gave his version of everything. He did confess to probably 60 to 70%. There are things he left out that he I would imagine he left them out because we didn't know about them. So why tell? And then he shared his version of things that made them look not so bad. Mm-hmm. So instead of holding hands regularly, it was one time in front of other people. Instead of meeting late at night at Walmart on a regular basis, it was one time because she had gone through a issue with her parents and she needed someone to console her. And so he put his arm around her in public, which is still weird. Like, a grown man, 40 something years old with a 20-year-old staffer in a public place, putting your arm around her. Like, I can't think of any context where that would be okay for me.
It makes no sense. But see, that's the part of the thing for me, Ron, too, that as like, you're now 59 years old and I'm 42 years old, have kids, a wife, and I'm thinking in all of these cases, Ron, and this is something the body of Christ needs to think through this. The supporters of Michael Brown need to think through this, that in all of these type of situations, well, they were just sitting in Walmart at midnight talking because it's a spiritual daughter. If I was sitting in Walmart parking lot alone in a car and my current pastor walked up to the car and saw me alone with a 20-year-old girl, that should be the end.
It's messed up.
Oh, it is. It would be, a lot would be done in my life. Like that would
and we wouldn't have known about that, but a fire elder saw them in a car together at Walmart. Yeah. So he gave his responses. I was beginning to see that there's a lot more to this story than it, I can't remember his first response. There's no truth to it. I was beginning to see that there's quite a bit of truth to it. And I wrote him the next day, seeing these two guys. And I said, Mike, based on what you've told us, not based on what I've heard, not based on what else might be out there, based on just what you wrote us last night, this was sexual misconduct, or at least misconduct. And it's at a level that you could not repent on it on your own. It had to be dealt with by elders, and you didn't honor your elders. And when I say his elders, I don't mean people older than him. I mean, he was the senior elder of a team of elders, and that included Bob Gladstone, Keith Collins, Josh Peters, and others. And I said the only way to deal with that, and then the issue with Kim, which he told me was a unhealthy and sinful soul tie, and the only thing he admitted is that she wrote something inappropriate and he wrote it down, which ended up not being, it was far worse than that.
It was much worse.
Because Sarah, who I would meet in about a week, she found on a legal pad in his nightstand, I don't know how many pages of erotic speech fantasies between the both of them. So he was doing his best to not, to admit to what he had to, because there was just evidence. Again, this is my speculation. I don't live in his brain, in his mind, in his heart, so I don't know. But that's how I understood it. And I said, listen, we're here for you. We love you. I'll help you through this process. Like, I was willing at that moment. If he had confessed and said, all right, I'm willing to do this, I would have, where was I? I was in the States. I would have gone down to Charlotte and said, let me take your hand Let me love you. Let me help you get through this. But he did not respond that way. He responded by saying that he would pray about it and that the only issue that could even be considered abuse was the issue with Sarah, the issue with Kim. We quote, we will not talk about, which is weird because he wrote, after he made the strange video where he talked about his relationship with Kim and said it was an emotional tie. He told me it was a unhealthy and sinful soul tie, but there it was an emotional tie. He wrote a pastor shortly after that and said, I've been wanting to make that video since I heard about the allegations on September 13th. That is exactly opposite what he told the three of us, which is that we will not talk about it.
Wow.
So I was, obviously things were beginning to add up. And at that point I went to his board and I asked them if they were going to meet with this girl, Sarah. She's, have you talked to her? Do you plan to talk? And they had no plans. So to me, it just seemed logical. I need to get a hold of her. So I contacted Londa Parker. And I said, Londa, can you, I know Londa. I said, can you see if Sarah's willing to talk to me? I didn't think she would. I felt she would think of me as part of the old guard, old white male leadership that is going to probably sent by Mike to, clamp her down. So she reluctantly agreed to talk to me. She told me later she was terrified. And at the same time, by the end, she said the fact that a leader in the charismatic world came and listened to me and believed me, it emboldened me. And that's one of the reasons when people say, why do you got to speak about these things? That's why. Because when leadership takes a stand, people are encouraged to have information to come forward.
That's exactly right.
So I then took that information. I quoted her word for word, and I wrote it down and I sent it to the Mike Brown's board, Line of Fire board, and they were shocked. It was not the story he had told them. And they were, the email I got back revealed to me that they were just stunned, heartbroken. They're talking about their heart goes out for Sarah. They believe her.
Wow.
And then on Sunday, they confronted Mike with the information.
So
at
Ron,
that point, let me say this real quick.
Go ahead.
At that point, I understood that Mike knows that Sarah is the source. Up until they confronted her with Sarah's story, he was convinced that it was Chris Bennett, Greg Montella, Catherine Marielke, just people that were out to get him. And by the way, these people are out to defend Sarah.
That's right.
And he portrayed everybody just bitter and angry and disgruntled. He did not know it was Sarah. The minute he knew it was Sarah, I believed that he would try and intimidate her. So I called her up. I texted her and I said, listen, now Mike knows that you're the source for the Roy's Report article. We need to find you a lawyer, someone that can be your representative, hopefully somebody that would do a pro bono. I said, but until we do that, I'm willing to represent you. If anybody calls you, a lawyer, Mike, Nancy, anyone calls you about this information, I'm willing, if you want me to. If you don't want me to, then that's fine. And she wrote back immediately and said, absolutely, please, please, please. So I said, all right, anybody calls you, just tell them I'm representing you and they can talk to me. So 3 days later, she gets a series of text messages from the wife of Josh Peters, who is the leader of Fire International, which Mike is, Mike birthed. He's on the board. It's a mission sending agency. And these were very manipulative messages couched with really wonderful language of care, but telling her, if you do this, understand your name is going to get out there. You won't be able to protect yourself. And your enemy is not Mike Brown. Your enemy is Satan. And she immediately sent those messages to me. And I emailed them and told them never to contact her again. And that I was gentle. I was nice. But I said, this isn't really inappropriate. And this could be seen by people as an attempt to silence her.
Yes. Not
an attempt to get her healing or whatever. And I don't know at what level Mike was a part of that, but it'd be very weird that the wife, who herself is, I think she's the CFO, very close, 26, 27-year relationship with Mike Brown, that she would send that out without talking to Mike first. It's just hard to believe.
Right.
And they did not contact me. They did not apologize. So 2 days later, I wrote them a much more severe email, which I have no regrets because what they did, in my opinion, is reprehensible.
Yeah.
This girl has suffered for 23 years. Her soul was scarred. She was on fire for God. The reason she was at the school was because of Mike Brown and his calling, and that she was shown special favor and allowed in the inner circle made her feel extremely special until it got weird. And then she left broken and backslidden.
Wow.
So now, instead of reaching out to her with good intention, they're trying to silence her. So from that point on, things became different in my relationship with Mike. And we don't have time to go into it, but he wrote a letter to my leadership team and said that I was trying to destroy his life and his ministry, that I was relying on the word of a demonstrably false witness who has changed her story many times over time. And by the way, since 2020, she only changed one. She didn't change anything. She added one detail.
She added a detail. That was an embarrassing detail for her. It was what people don't understand about these women in these situations is they feel embarrassed because they feel that they're at fault for everything. That's why they're silent. People go, why are 20 years later? Because he's popular and you want to get money? It's like, no, it's because she's popular and you realize that he's doing this to other people right now. It's quite possible. I'm not alleging that Mike Brown is, but we know that Mike Bickle was. So it's the desire to protect the body of Christ and to get justice for these wrongdoings. But yeah, she added one.
Yeah, and let me just say, having known Sarah since November and in touch with her regularly in a WhatsApp group with several other people, she has never once, not one time has she mentioned money. She did this for all the right reason, and I can tell you the stress of it. There are many days she said, I wish I never did it. Yeah. I wish I never did it because of the way they've treated her.
Yeah.
And they're going to have to face God one day about that.
Yeah.
Jesus said it would be better for you to have a millstone tied around your neck and thrown into the deepest part of the sea than to abuse one of his little ones. Mm. And not only did they abuse her 23 years ago, it's continuing right now. And I'm amazed at her resiliency. She is an amazing woman, and I'm so proud of her. And she is the hero in this story. But they wanted to silence her. So this letter, it just went. It was so over the top that a week later I wrote Mike and I said, you lied about me throughout this whole thing. Mm. And I listed all of them, and he responded by saying the letter was a mistake.
Yeah.
Which is different than saying, please forgive me for lying about you.
Well, this is the thing that I've noticed, and we can kind of wrap up here because I know that we're getting, that you got some other things coming up, but something that I'm noticing.
Just lunch.
just lunch with the dad. That sounds great.
Yes.
But
yes.
Something that I'm noticing about Michael Brown is that he's a great debater. I mean, he is great at speaking and writing. And the issue that I'm running into when I'm reading, okay, if you just take all the Roy's report, you take the Firefly report, you take his own words, it's that the story changes. So literally what he's saying about Sarah, that her story is changing, we can literally go all the way back to these testimonies and say he's changing his story left and right. And my biggest issue with Mike Brown is if he had come forward about this when he was initially confronted about Kim and the sexual conversations, for all the audience that doesn't take time to read all the report, he had sexual conversations with this married woman that was in the congregation, and he told her not to sleep with her husband anymore, and he tried to meet up with her. And there's all the Ray's testimony, the husband's testimony, not being included in the Firefly report was mind-blowing to me. But everybody needs to read that testimony. And then what he did with Sarah, but his changing of the story, and what that shows me is the easy ability of these men to twist the truth, to tell small white lies over the years, is what's so deeply concerning to me. And in my mind, the fact that he's done that over the years, it disqualifies him currently from being a voice in the body of Christ. I do not trust a word out of this man's mouth.
Yeah, and imagine being me. I've enjoyed a wonderful friendship with him. We do a lot of ministry together, or did. I was a regular guest on his radio show, and I loved him. He was falsely accused in 2018 of being a false prophet by a Reformed Baptist minister in Israel on our little email network of several hundred people. And nobody defended him like I did. I mean, I went to the guy face to face. I went to his employer, Bible school. I went to the I was livid that he could carelessly call somebody a false prophet without you do that as a council. You don't do that as an individual. And just 6 months ago, he was in Israel. Now it's almost a year ago. He was in Israel. I took him down south to where the October 7th attacks happened, and we filmed down there. I took him to lunch. I treated him like anyone who thinks that I have had a vendetta or was seeking to get revenge. This is somebody I trusted. I knew who he was. I knew his weaknesses, just like he knows mine. That's when you know that you're real friends. If you had told me that the Mike Brown I knew and loved and served with, had been lying to people for 23 years, like grossly lying, with callously lying, I would have said that's impossible. Just in October, if you had told me that, that's nuts. There is no way that can be true. And I listen, I don't think that he goes around lying all the time. I think that in high pressure situations, I saw it during the split that he wasn't forthright, but I thought it was a blip. And I have now read these stories. There's a story in the report where he tells Mike Labanovic, a former leader in Fire, who confronted him in July of 2023 about these things, referring to what Sarah found written in the erotic speech between him and Kim. He said that Kim wrote him something in an email. By the way, he told Rebecca she said something. He tells Mike she wrote something. It's just all over the place.
That's what I'm finding. Yeah, it's just changing. Yeah.
But he says this is the part that is unconscionable. The utter disregard for Kim as a human being. He said she wrote something to him in an email that was inappropriate. He showed it to his wife, and the two of them, and he wrote it down so he could show it to his wife, and then they were going to go confront her together. That is so messed up and so dishonoring of Ray, of Kim, I don't know how someone tells that story. And even if you say, well, Ron, that you don't have all the facts there. Well, I'm believing Mike Labanovic, but there's so many other stories. There's a phone call from 2023, 24 February, where somebody brought up these issues, and this Mike says to this guy, "I'm smiling as I read these things because I know it's so far from the truth. Give me a call and I'll tell you what happened." So he's smiling as he's being accused of truth. And the phone call, which, this might be the first time, if Dr. Brown's listening, we'll find out, but it was recorded. And I've listened to it, and it's 15 minutes of not being honest. It's shocking. Wow. And if the investigator had simply followed up a lead, he would have had that phone call.
Wow. So that's, yeah. And
so
it's a bummer that not everything was in there. But the other thing I want to just kind of piggyback off what you're saying is, even hearing that he said, I'm smiling reading this, the thing, it's almost like this idea that kind of, you said this earlier at the very beginning, to kind of go all the way back to what you said regarding, certain theology about leaders, that that their calling is so great. It's so important that their character can't be exposed or can't be.
Well, Mike kept saying to me throughout this whole thing, to me and many people, that the Lord had spoken to him and said, I have your back. And now that I know that he knew he was guilty at the time, and he believed that. I mean, he said it with deep conviction. It almost like God is saying, I know what you did, but it's okay because you've done all these other great things, and I've got your back. You're my man. You're my guy. Yeah. He also said that the Lord showed him that the article was not going to come out in the Roy's report. And it did. So there's a bit of delusion.
Delusion, self-aggrandizement, delusion, believing that God is talking to you about things that you are that you know were wrong, but you're convincing. Like even the email I'm looking at right now from October 26, 2024, and he says, for the critics out there, this is to you, why did I meet Sarah at Walmart? Think about it. If I was at my office working late, her mom and dad would be fighting. She wanted to get out of the house and talk with me. What should I do? Should I have her come to the office? No, then we'd be alone.
No, you have her come to your home.
Exactly, with
You
your
ever come to
wife
your home,
there.
meet with your wife.
It's just, it's like he said. Then he says the whole point was to be in public. Anyway, watch and see. I'm not in denial. Watch and see. This is the way. This is way, way bigger than me. I love you, friend. It's like as though this is way bigger than me. God's involved. The devil's coming at me. God's involved too. God's going to. It's this idea of revolution that he thought he was like a Christian Che Guevara, a Christian Woodstock, or just it's like it's self-aggrandizement, and the problem is that it's every single thing, even to the point of the Roy's report coming out last night about Haiti and the long thing that he wrote. I'm in contact with some of these whistleblowers, and I'm going, he is so good at twisting words and changing stories.
He referred to himself as a whistleblower.
Exactly.
I was the whistleblower.
And an advocate for them. And they're going, you weren't an advocate for us. And I'm going, he said, well, that's how investigations work. You can't talk until, I'm going, what investigation? You mean the Globe Task Force? You weren't even aware that they had, that the police did not do an investigation because they couldn't, because it was in Haiti. So every single thing this man says is just so twisting. And I don't have a vendetta. People could say I have some vendetta. Frankly, I didn't like Brown years ago, but then I was open to him, in the last 5 years. I would listen to some stuff every now and again. But when this happened, I saw him on stage at IHOP, I went, he is defending a predator, and I feel like he knows it. There's a lie going on here. But Ron, do you have any final thoughts for us, man? This has been such a helpful interview.
Yeah, I'd say a couple things. Number one, I did love him, and I still love him. I love him and his family. I'm sure they're not big on me right now, and I'm okay with that. But I do love them. My prayer is that Mike finds repentance, true repentance. And true repentance makes amends. It confesses fully what happened. When I see people like Jeremiah Johnson putting out things in defense of Mike, if Mike was repentant right now, he would call Jeremiah and say, don't do it, bro. I need to deal with this the right way. But seeing the statement in Globe yesterday, that in the Roy's report, that's not in posture of repentance. So I know he has a team of elders around him right now that are supposed to be ministering to him and mapping out a plan for him. I just pray. I don't know who they are, but I pray they're good and honest and not intimidated. But I also want to just speak to victims of abuse, because what I've learned in the past year and a half is about the horror, the damage, the soul damage. It literally scars the soul, whether it's a parent to a child, whether it's a minister to a congregant, that when you groom somebody into sexual immorality or spiritual abuse, it messes people up. I read the story yesterday that we're going to make public soon about a former student that went through deliverance ministry and at our former Bible school. She went with with a mild case of depression, and they had her on a 2-year, or a multi-year program of deliverance, 9 hours a week.
Wow.
She had a little depression, and it messed her up. So we got to care about the sheep more. Like I read that passage earlier that Bob quoted, the members of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable. We have to love the weaker members. Enough of celebrity Christianity. God is bringing it down. Enough of the narcissism. We have got to learn to love those sheep and understand that if we, as ministers, wound one of those little ones, that there is a devastating passage, the other Matthew 18, I call it. We love to quote, Matthew 18, 15 through 17, but Matthew 18:6 is about judgment coming on those who hurt these little followers of Yeshua, these weaker ones. So if you're out there and you have been a victim, I just want you to know that the view that trauma gave you of God is not real. God is loving. God is a genuine shepherd. He cares for you, and he wants to heal your heart, heal your wound. He is for you, not against you. And I'm saying that because when I've gone through all these testimonies of former students, the thing I see in a lot of them is that the spiritual abuse injured their ability to see God as he truly is. And that's tragic.
Wow. That's so good, man. That's so good. Well, guys, I just want you to, how can they follow you, Ron? Where do you have a YouTube channel? I know you're on X as Ron Cantor.
If they can just remember my name and go to roncantor.com, we have a mailing list. We write several times a week. And, we have a page on Facebook, YouTube, X.
Awesome. Well, man, I really, really appreciate you coming on and just sharing your heart, sharing the journey, sharing the story. And we definitely got to connect more. So thank you so much, Ron, for everything.
Amen.
And hey, man,
hey,
go
and
enjoy. Let
me just say to you that you and Christina, what you guys have done over the past year or so has been a blessing. I've watched you. You know that you're not just an exposure guy. You know the word. You share the word. So we're blessed, and I just want to encourage both of you to continue.
Thanks, brother. I really do appreciate that, man. Okay, Ron, I'm gonna let you off here. Go enjoy lunch with your dad, and I'll put this out pretty soon. I'll keep in touch with you. Okay.
Awesome. Thanks.
Take care, brother.
Wake up and win. Wake up and win. Wake up and win. Wake up.